The desert stretched endlessly before me, a vast expanse of shifting sands beneath a sky that seemed unnaturally large. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dunes, the colors of the sky bleeding into deep purples and reds. The wind, which had been little more than a gentle breeze during the day, now began to pick up, swirling sand into the air in hypnotic spirals. I had been wandering for days, lost and disoriented. My throat was parched, and each breath felt like swallowing glass. I couldn't remember how I ended up here, in this desolate place. What had started as a simple road trip had become something far more sinister. My last clear memory was of my car breaking down near the edge of the desert. The road ahead had seemed inviting, the horizon promising some form of civilization. But as I ventured deeper into the sands, the world had begun to unravel. There was no map, no sign of life, no landmarks to guide me. Just the endless desert and a growing sense that I was no longer alone. The first night had been peaceful enough. I had watched the stars blink into existence above me, marveling at how clear the sky was without the pollution of city lights. But as the hours wore on, an unease settled over me. The desert, once serene, began to feel oppressive, as if the very sands beneath me were alive and waiting for something. On the second night, I started hearing the whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, playing tricks on my tired mind. But these whispers had a rhythm, a pattern that was disturbingly human. They were faint at first, like voices carried on the breeze, just out of earshot. I had brushed them off as my imagination, a byproduct of dehydration and exhaustion. But tonight, the whispers were louder. I stood at the top of a dune, peering out into the distance. The wind had stilled, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. And then, like a breath of air on the back of my neck, I heard it again. A voice. No, not one voice. Many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all murmuring at once, just loud enough to make out the words, but too faint to understand. My heart raced as I turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon for any sign of life. But the desert was empty. A part of me knew I should keep moving, keep walking until I found some sort of shelter or, God willing, another person. But the whispers were pulling at me, beckoning me deeper into the heart of the desert. Against my better judgment, I followed them. As I descended the dune, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me, filling my mind with their incoherent chatter. I could feel the weight of the sand shifting beneath my feet, almost as if it were trying to swallow me whole. And then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the whispers stopped. I froze, standing in the midst of a vast sea of sand, the silence pressing in on me like a physical force. I strained to hear something, anything that would break the suffocating quiet. And then, from the darkness ahead, I saw it. A light. It flickered weakly, barely visible against the twilight sky, but it was there. A small, glowing orb hovering above the sands, no larger than a firefly. My pulse quickened. Was it real, or was this another trick of the desert? Either way, I had no choice. I needed to follow it. With hesitant steps, I moved towards the light. It floated just ahead of me, always staying just out of reach, like a will-o'-the-wisp leading me deeper into the unknown. The dunes around me seemed to shift and writhe, their shapes changing with every step I took. The air grew colder, the once dry heat of the desert replaced by a biting chill that sank deep into my bones. As I crested another dune, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood in the distance, silhouetted against the dying light of the sun. At first, I thought it was a mirage, just another trick of the desert playing with my mind. But as I drew closer, I realized it was no illusion. Someone or something was standing perfectly still, watching me. I stopped in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure did not move. It was too far away to make out any details, but I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and oppressive. The whispers returned, faint at first, then rising to a crescendo. They weren't just around me anymore. They were inside my head, burrowing into my thoughts, filling my mind with fragmented words and dark promises. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my body refused to move. The figure raised an arm, slowly, deliberately, and pointed towards me. And then, without a sound, it began to walk. Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted, scrambling up the nearest dune, my feet sinking into the sand with every step. The whispers grew louder, more frenzied, as if they were urging me to stop, to turn around and face whatever was chasing me. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. As I reached the top of the dune, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The figure was gone. The desert was empty once more, silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing. But I knew better than to trust the quiet. The whispers had stopped again, but they would return. They always did. I sank to my knees, gasping for breath, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The light was gone, the figure was gone, and I was alone again, or so I hoped. But deep down, I knew the truth. The desert wasn't empty. It was watching, waiting, and I was not alone. I didn't know how long I knelt there, trembling at the top of the dune. My legs felt like jelly. My heart pounded in my ears, but my mind was locked in the terrifying realization that I wasn't safe. Not here. Not anywhere in this cursed place. I forced myself to breathe, slow and deep, trying to steady the rising panic. The whispers had faded, but I knew they would come back. They always did with the wind, and with them would come whatever that thing was. I closed my eyes, replaying the image of the figure standing so still, so unnaturally still in the distance. What had it been? Human? Something else? I didn't want to know, but curiosity, or maybe fear, gnawed at me relentlessly. When I finally rose to my feet, the night had fully descended. The sky was a sea of stars, glittering coldly above, indifferent to the terror that lurked below. The air was sharp, almost freezing now, and I cursed myself for not preparing for the temperature drop. But then again, how could I have prepared for this? I had to move. My body was aching from exhaustion, my muscles screaming for rest, but I knew that staying still wasn't an option. Something was out there, watching. I could feel it. I forced myself to take a step forward, then another, descending the dune in uneven, stumbling strides. Each step felt wrong, as if the sand itself was conspiring against me, dragging me down with every move. And yet I kept going. The light was gone, vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. Now there was only darkness, stretching endlessly in every direction. The vast emptiness of the desert was suffocating, a void that swallowed all hope. But I kept moving, not because I had a destination in mind, but because I feared what might happen if I stopped. As I trudged onward, the wind began to stir again, soft at first, like a breath against my skin, then stronger, pushing against me with invisible hands. The sand danced in swirling eddies around my feet, and with it came the whispers. Not faint this time, not distant. They were close. I froze, straining to hear the words, but they were still incomprehensible, a mix of garbled syllables and eerie laughter. My pulse quickened, a cold sweat breaking out along my spine. I turned, scanning the horizon, but there was nothing, just the endless sea of dunes, stretching far into the blackness. But I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me, countless eyes hidden within the swirling sands, watching, waiting. My skin crawled, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The whispers grew louder, building to a crescendo, until they filled my mind completely, drowning out my own thoughts. Then suddenly they stopped. The silence was deafening, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me from all sides. I couldn't hear the wind anymore, couldn't hear my own ragged breathing. It was as if the world itself had ceased to exist, leaving only me, standing alone in the void. And then I saw it. Not far ahead, barely visible against the pale light of the moon, was a structure. At first, I thought it was another hallucination, a trick of my exhausted mind. But as I took a cautious step forward, the shape became clearer. It was a building, or rather what was left of one. The walls were crumbling, half buried in the sand, but it was unmistakably man-made, a relic from a time long past, perhaps, forgotten by the world and swallowed by the desert. The roof had collapsed in on itself, and the windows were little more than jagged holes in the stone, but it was shelter. And right now, that was all that mattered. I hurried towards it, my feet sinking into the soft sand with every step. The closer I got, the more the building seemed to loom over me, its shadow stretching long and dark across the dunes. When I reached the entrance, I hesitated for a moment, peering into the darkness within. There was no sound, no movement, just a yawning blackness that seemed to go on forever. But I had no choice. I stepped inside. The air was cooler here, sheltered from the wind, but it carried a heavy, musty scent, like the stale breath of something long dead. The floor was uneven, the stone cracked and broken, and sand had poured in through the gaping holes in the walls, covering everything in a thick, shifting layer. I made my way carefully through the debris, my footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. In the far corner of the room, there was a staircase. It was old, barely intact, the wood splintered and rotten, but it seemed to lead down into the earth. My stomach clenched with a sudden wave of unease. Something about the stairs felt wrong. They were too dark, too inviting, as if they were waiting for me to descend. I hesitated, my hand resting on the splintered banister, when a sound echoed from the darkness below. A faint, distant whisper. No, not distant. Close. My breath caught in my throat, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. I stepped back from the stairs, retreating into the shadows, my eyes wide with fear. The whispering grew louder, and then, from the darkness at the base of the stairs, I saw movement. Something was coming up the stairs. I didn't wait to see what it was. I turned and bolted, scrambling through the crumbling doorway and out into the night. The sand seemed to rise up to meet me, dragging at my feet as I ran, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent, filling my mind with their madness. I stumbled down the nearest dune, my legs giving out beneath me as I tumbled to the bottom. The cold sand scraped against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was focused on the structure behind me and the thing that had been climbing those stairs. The wind howled around me, swirling the sand into the air, and with it, the whispers. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block them out, but they were inside me now, echoing in the deepest corners of my mind. I don't know how long I lay there, curled up in the sand, my body trembling with fear. Hours? Minutes? Time had no meaning here. I only knew that I couldn't go back. Whatever was in that building, it was waiting for me. Eventually, the whispers faded, leaving me alone with the sound of my own ragged breathing. The wind had died down again, and the desert was silent once more. But I knew, deep down, that I was no longer alone in this place. Something had followed me, and it was getting closer. The desert night seemed endless, a suffocating void that swallowed every sound, every breath. My body ached from the fall, but I forced myself up, every muscle screaming in protest. Sand clung to my skin, my mouth tasted of grit, but it was the fear gnawing at me that kept me moving. Couldn't stop. Not here. Not with whatever was lurking so close behind. I scanned the horizon, searching for anything, any direction, any hope of escape, but the desert was a featureless wasteland, its rolling dunes stretching into eternity. The building was behind me, a silhouette against the starlit sky. I couldn't see the thing that had climbed those stairs, but I could feel its presence, a cold weight pressing against my chest. It was out there, waiting, watching. The wind had died completely now, leaving an eerie stillness in its place. The silence wasn't comforting. It was thick, oppressive, like the world was holding its breath. I knew I had to keep moving, but every step felt heavier than the last, like the sands beneath me were conspiring to drag me under. As I staggered forward, I became aware of something new, a subtle shift in the air, a vibration beneath my feet. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but the longer I walked, the more certain I became. The ground was trembling. I stopped, crouching down to touch the sand with my fingers. The vibrations were rhythmic, pulsing in time with something deep below the surface. I listened, my heart pounding in my ears, and then I heard it. A distant, muffled sound. A low, guttural hum, rising from the depths of the earth. I scrambled to my feet, my pulse racing. What the hell was this place? Nothing about it felt right. Nothing had felt right since the moment I'd stepped foot into this cursed desert. But now, it was as if the ground itself was alive, breathing, humming with something ancient and malevolent. The whispers returned. Soft at first, like a gentle breeze brushing against my ear. Then louder, more urgent, like a crowd gathering around me. Their voices blending into a cacophony of hisses and murmurs. I spun around, desperate to find the source, but there was nothing, just the empty expanse of sand, stretching endlessly in every direction. But I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't. I broke into a run, my legs trembling beneath me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sand shifted beneath my feet, threatening to pull me down, but I kept moving, my eyes locked on the horizon, praying that something, anything, would appear to save me from this nightmare. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. They swirled around me like a storm, filling my mind with their fragmented words. I couldn't understand them, but I could feel their intent, their hunger. They weren't just sounds, they were thoughts, and they were trying to burrow into my mind. Keep running, I told myself. Don't stop. Don't listen. The whispers seemed to sense my resistance, their tone shifting from pleading to something darker, more insistent. I could feel their presence pressing against my skull, trying to push their way in, trying to take hold of me. I wasn't fast enough. From the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow moving across the dunes, slithering closer. It was too far to make out any details, just a mass of blackness crawling over the sands with unnatural speed. My heart leapt into my throat as the shadow grew, stretching across the ground, moving in ways that no human or animal ever could. It wasn't alone. More shadows followed, emerging from the dunes like phantoms rising from the grave. There were no bodies, no forms, just pure darkness, writhing and pulsing as they closed in on me from all sides. I could hear them now, not just the whispers, but the sound of something scraping against the sand, something that slithered. I pushed myself harder, forcing my exhausted legs to carry me faster, but the shadows were gaining. They moved with a fluid grace, twisting and weaving through the dunes like snakes hunting their prey. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel them drawing nearer, the air around me growing colder with every second. The humming from below grew louder, vibrating through the soles of my feet, making the ground quiver. The entire desert seemed to pulse with the sound, as if the very earth was alive and thrumming with anticipation. Something was stirring beneath the surface, something ancient, something that should never have been disturbed. My foot caught on a rock hidden beneath the sand, sending me sprawling face first into the ground. The impact knocked the air from my lungs, pain shooting through my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Panic surged through me as the shadows drew closer, the sound of their slithering filling my ears. I scrambled to my feet, my vision swimming, but it was too late. The first of the shadows was upon me, circling like a vulture, its dark mass rippling with unnatural energy. I backed away, my heart pounding, but there was no escape. More shadows joined it, surrounding me in a ring of blackness, their forms shifting and undulating in the moonlight. They didn't attack. Not yet. They were waiting, watching, and then, from the center of the circle, the sand began to shift. It started slowly, just a faint ripple in the ground. But as I watched, the sand began to part, sinking down into itself as if something beneath the surface was digging its way up. The humming grew louder, more intense, vibrating through my entire body. The whispers swirled around me, their voices rising in excitement, their words finally clear enough to understand. It wakes, comes. I backed away, my heart thundering in my chest, but I couldn't take my eyes off the sand. The hole in the ground was widening now, a gaping maw opening in the earth, as if the desert itself was yawning awake. The shadows danced around the edge of the pit, their movements growing frenzied, as if they were celebrating the arrival of something monstrous. And then I saw it. From the depths of the pit, a hand emerged. It was skeletal, its skin stretched tight over bones that seemed too long, too thin to belong to anything human. The fingers clawed at the edge of the pit, dragging the rest of the creature into the moonlight. I stumbled backward, choking on my own breath. It wasn't just a hand. It was an arm, followed by another, and then a head. Its face, if it could even be called that, was a grotesque mockery of human features, its skin pale and cracked, like parchment stretched over a skull. Its eyes were hollow pits of darkness, and yet I could feel them watching me, boring into me with a hunger that went beyond flesh. It climbed out of the pit, pulling itself up with jerky, unnatural movements, its body impossibly long and thin, like it had been starved for centuries. The shadows closed in around it, their forms merging with its, becoming one with the creature as it rose to its full height. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if they were chanting, urging the thing to act. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature turned its head towards me, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. I felt a pull, deep in my chest, like the very air around me was being sucked away, drawn into those endless pits of darkness. It opened its mouth, a gaping, black void, and the whispers flooded into me, overwhelming, suffocating. And then it spoke, not with words, but with a sound, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones, shaking me to my core. It was the sound I had heard beneath the sand, the sound that had been rising from the earth all along. It wasn't just a sound, it was a command. Come to me. The world around me blurred, the edges of reality bending and twisting under the weight of that voice. I tried to fight it, tried to resist, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs moved on their own, carrying me towards the creature, towards the pit. The shadows parted for me, welcoming me into their circle. I was trapped. There was no escape. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I couldn't stop myself. My legs moved as if under a spell, carrying me ever closer to the gaping maw in the earth. The creature, that skeletal abomination, stood tall before me, its hollow eyes locked on mine. Each step I took felt like wading through thick, invisible muck, but no matter how much I struggled, I couldn't turn away. The desert had claimed me. My will was no longer my own. The whispers filled my mind, louder now, clearer. Come to me. Join the depths. The words were no longer mere suggestions. They were commands, ancient and overpowering. I felt them seeping into my thoughts, coiling around my consciousness like cold, wet vines. The ground beneath me vibrated with the hum of the desert's terrible secret, the endless pit growing larger with every passing second. As I neared the edge, I finally understood the truth. The desert was alive. Not just the shifting sands or the eerie winds, but something older, something buried, something that had been waiting for me all along. The shadows that danced around the pit were its servants, and the thing that had emerged from the ground was only a fragment of its true form. I wanted to scream, to tear myself away from the pull, but my body betrayed me. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but the whispers soothed my panic, dulling my senses. They were no longer chaotic, no longer unintelligible. They formed a single voice now, seductive and hypnotic, promising release, promising peace, endless rest, endless hunger. I was close to the edge now, so close I could feel the pit's cold breath rising from its depths, chilling my skin. The creature before me raised its skeletal hands, welcoming me like a twisted prophet greeting a disciple. Its mouth, a dark void of endless hunger, opened wider, a black hole that seemed to swallow the very light around it. My feet reached the edge of the pit, and I froze, staring into the endless blackness below. It was vast, bottomless, a dark eternity that stretched far beyond the limits of my vision. The wind had died completely, and in the stillness, I could hear something far below, something moving, something stirring in the deep. It was slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of a monstrous god awakening from its slumber. The creature before me tilted its head, as if waiting for me to step forward, to plunge into the abyss. The shadows circled tighter around us, their forms pulsing in time with the hum beneath the earth. I could feel the pull of the pit now, a force so strong it felt like gravity itself was conspiring to drag me down into the dark. I leaned forward, my balance teetering on the edge. My mind screamed at me to stop, but my body was no longer mine. My eyes locked onto the hollow pits where the creature's gaze should have been, and I felt something shift inside me, a connection. A tether between my soul and the endless void below. "Come home," the whispers urged, soft and gentle. "There is no pain, no suffering, only the depths." And then I saw it. Deep in the pit, far below the surface, something moved. A shape, a slithering mass of shadows, writhing and shifting like a living nightmare. It was vast, its form stretching across the unseen floor of the pit like a coiled serpent. But it was more than that. It was part of the desert itself. A thing made of sand and darkness, ancient and ravenous. The creature before me lowered its arms, its head bowing in reverence. The shadows stilled, and in that moment, I realized that this thing, this god, wasn't just waiting for me. It was hungry. I don't know what broke me free. Maybe it was the sight of that unspeakable thing in the pit, or maybe it was the sudden clarity that rushed through my mind in those final moments. But something snapped. My legs, which had been moving forward on their own, suddenly halted. I jerked backward, stumbling away from the edge, gasping for breath. The creature hissed, a sound like sand scraping against bone, and it lunged forward, its bony fingers outstretched. I fell to the ground, scrambling back, but the pit behind it began to stir, the sands around it shifting as if alive. The shadows closed in, blocking my escape, their dark forms writhing and shifting with unnatural speed. But I wasn't going to let them take me. Not now. Not like this. My hand found a rock, half buried in the sand, and without thinking, I hurled it at the creature. It struck the thing's face with a sickening crack, and for a brief moment, the whispers in my head faltered. The creature reeled, its skeletal face cracking as the force of the blow knocked it back. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, my legs screaming with pain, my lungs burning as I raced across the sand. Behind me, I could hear the thing shrieking, its voice high and keening, a sound that pierced the night. The shadows swarmed after me, but I was faster. Fear propelled me, desperation driving me forward. The dunes rose and fell beneath my feet, the landscape shifting with each step, but I kept running, my eyes fixed on the horizon. There was no light, no guide, only the promise of escape, of getting away from the pit, from the thing that had tried to consume me. But I wasn't fast enough. The whispers returned, stronger now, more insistent. They clawed at my mind, pulling at my thoughts, urging me to turn back, to submit. I felt the weight of their gaze on my back, the pressure of their will pressing down on me like a physical force. I stumbled, my vision blurring, but I kept moving. I had to get away. I had to. The ground beneath me gave way. With a gasp, I tumbled down another dune, sand cascading around me as I slid helplessly into the valley below. My body hit the bottom with a bone-jarring thud, and for a moment, I lay there, dazed, the world spinning around me. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. I could hear the shadows slithering closer, the creature's wail echoing across the dunes. But I couldn't move. My body was spent, my muscles screaming in agony. I was trapped. And then, through the haze of pain and fear, I saw it. Ahead of me, half buried in the sand, was something metallic, a shape angular and unnatural against the landscape. I blinked, my vision clearing, and realized what it was. A car. My car. It was the same car I had abandoned what felt like an eternity ago. The engine dead, the hood covered in sand. I had come full circle. Despair washed over me, cold and unforgiving. I was right back where I had started, and now there was no escape. But as I lay there, staring at the car, something caught my eye, a glint of light reflecting off the rearview mirror. I squinted, my heart skipping a beat. There, in the distance, a faint glow. Headlights. A vehicle was approaching. Hope surged through me, and with a strength I didn't know I had left, I dragged myself toward the car, crawling through the sand on shaking limbs. The headlights grew brighter, cutting through the darkness, a beacon of salvation in this godforsaken place. Behind me, the whispers screamed in rage, their voices rising to a fevered pitch. The creature howled, its cry echoing across the dunes as it closed in. But I didn't stop, couldn't. My fingers scraped against the door of the car, pulling it open with a desperate yank. I clambered inside, slamming the door shut behind me, and for a brief moment, the world outside went silent. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I collapsed against the seat, gasping for air, my heart hammering in my chest. The headlights were close now, almost blinding. I watched through the cracked windshield as the vehicle, a dusty, beaten-up truck, crested the nearest dune, its engine growling as it barreled toward me. Relief flooded my veins. I was saved. The whispers returned. It's not over. I turned, my blood running cold as the truck came to a halt. The door creaked open and a figure stepped out. It was the same as before, the same figure I had seen in the distance, silhouetted against the dying light. And now it was here. It smiled, a terrible grin that stretched impossibly wide, and from behind it, the shadows rose once more. The pit was waiting, and it would wait forever.